Protecting our kids from child sexual abuse is not about eliminating risk. It's about reducing risk. And in fact, if you try to eliminate risk, you'll probably inadvertently harm your children. So those are really kind of the core pieces behind healing, is we have to first become aware of it. We have to then learn to regulate. Then we have to learn to act with intention. And so as you start talking about and you start advocating around the issue, whether that's on the prevention side or advocating for survivors to heal, survivors will start opening up to you. Then you do have to be in a place to give them space. In that case, what we ask, a little bit to your question, when people do disclose, is it always starts with a thank you for trusting me message, then follows like, I'm in your corner. How can I help? You get to control what I do with this. This is your story, but I want to help. How can I help? So that's the spirit of any questions that we ask once that disclosure's happened.
Raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness.
All right, everyone. Today's guest is Chris Yadon, the managing director of Saprea, a global nonprofit leading the fight against child sexual abuse and its lifelong impact. Chris has spent years at the junction of nonprofit leadership, advocacy, and healing, guiding thousands through recovery and prevention work. Under his leadership, Saprea has become one of the most trusted organizations offering free healing retreats, education programs, and community tools for survivors and caregivers. We're bringing Chris on today, not just to talk about the problem, but to also help demystify the path to healing, especially for men. This is a conversation for anyone who's struggled with the unspoken trauma, who's ready to stop carrying the weight alone, and who wants to understand how we, as a society, can respond with strength, truth, and compassion. Chris, welcome to the show. So glad to have you.
John, Will, really good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Pleasure. And Will, good to see you as always, brother. I'm down in Dallas, so I'm only 1 hour behind you today. Good to see you, my brother. And guess what? With Dallas, what's coming up in Dallas here in October?
Maybe the audience can tell us. Ding, ding, ding. You are correct. If you said there's a Spartan race in Dallas, Texas, October 19th, 2025, please join our team. Head to mentalkingmindfulness.com to learn all about it and sign up. We're going to have fun down there. It's great. It's going to be just a community opportunity for us to get together, and connect. We're going to do a 5K race. It's only 3.2 miles, so don't be too intimidated, or 3.1 miles, so don't be too intimidated. I know, exactly. Don't be too intimidated. It's going to be an obstacle course. We're going to have fun. I can't believe it's like we're already in July 1st. We're recording this, so it's like we're already in summer. So October be here before you know it. But right. Let's do our one breath grounding practice. So close your eyes if you like. Exhale the breath all the way out. Drop down with that exhale into this moment, into your body. Take a big, giant breath in through your nose. A little bit more. Fill all the way up to the chest, all the way to the sinus in your head. Hold for 3, for 2, for 1, and exhale. Let it go out. Awesome. And everybody, thanks for checking this out. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, leave us a review. Would be great. And all right, Chris, John, let's jump in.
Let's do this. All right, Chris, thanks for bearing with us for that long intro. But hey, brother, so appreciate what you're doing. I mean, clearly, like I said, when we were in the green room before we hit record, this is near and dear to my heart. I know many people who have been through this, have experienced it on both sides of the coin, whether it was to them themselves or to their child. And now, being a parent, I've got 3 young children. This is very important to me to work to prevent this and to work to heal it for those who have experienced it. So that said, you've worked with a ton of survivors, as I said in the beginning. But before we kind of take that deep dive, if someone listens to this episode all the way through, what do you hope they walk away with? Like what might shift for them?
A couple things. First of all, child sexual abuse for men is a particularly sensitive topic. Most men that experience child sexual abuse bury it. That's still true today. It's changing. It's slowly changing. It's changing. But what I want someone to walk away with, if they're a survivor, is that hope and healing are possible. If they're a parent, that there are things they can do that don't take a lot of work that significantly reduce the risk that they will be abused. And for anybody else that either doesn't identify as a survivor or as a parent, I would want them to walk away with the importance of feeling emotion to both our masculinity, but also our overall well-being and mental health as men.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And yes, if people don't listen to the rest of the show, I hope they walk away with that. So thank you for that, Chris. So what brought you to this work? What started you on this path?
Yeah, it really dates back to when I was younger, even though I didn't realize it then. I grew up right next to a beautiful cherry orchard. It was Grandpa's orchard. And, I'd go out on his irrigation turns, ride on the tractor, rumble around with him. Just kind of an idealistic upbringing. You might describe it that way. I spent more time in bare feet than I did with shoes on. Just
awesome.
Just that Gen X latchkey kid, shirt off, bare feet, no cares in the world, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's how I grew up. And there was trouble at home, but I dealt with that trouble by checking out and by numbing my emotions. And so that idealistic viewpoint I had was really came about as I ignored what was really happening around me. When it comes to child sexual abuse specifically, I wasn't aware of this until my young adult years, but several of my family members experienced child sexual abuse. I didn't experience it personally, but I had several family members that did. And I remember when I learned about that as a young adult, I was very, very angry. I was angry at how it was dealt with. I was angry that it happened. I was angry that society was telling us to shove it under the rug. And as it goes with anger, if we can deal with that emotion in a healthy way, it actually turns to action and advocacy, which really is where my journey of advocacy around this issue was born. So when the opportunity came in my career to do this full time, it was one of the easiest yeses I've ever given. It wasn't where I started my career, but it was an easy yes for me to engage, and haven't looked back since.
Nice. Chris, do you have kids?
I do. I have 6 and
my goodness,
2 grandkids. I'm a grandpa, guys.
Wow,
that's
man.
awesome.
You look great.
Hey, thanks.
So as a dad and now a grandpa, how does this affect you personally?
So when we talk about child sexual abuse, I think it's pretty core to our biology as men to be protectors, and it's something we shouldn't ignore. How we act on that can be healthy or unhealthy, but the fact that we want to protect is pretty core to our nature and our biology. So the key for me as a father and as a grandparent is, how do I direct that energy of wanting to protect my kids in a way that's healthy for them and reduces risk for them? Because you can protect in a way that actually has collateral damage, if you will, on your kids, or you can protect in a way that empowers them and strengthens them. And finding that balance can be tricky. And that's where our resources at saprea.org become so valuable, is they're very, very strong research-based resources of how we can actually reduce risk that our kids will be abused. And I keep emphasizing that term, reduce risk, on purpose, because protecting our kids from child sexual abuse is not about eliminating risk. It's about reducing risk. And in fact, if you try to eliminate risk, you'll probably inadvertently harm your children. I mean, we can't wrap them in bubble wrap and not expect bad outcomes. So it's really that perspective in terms of how I approach it as a parent and a grandparent. Reducing risk. What can I do to reduce risk?
Definitely agree with reducing versus eliminating. I've tried to eliminate risk at times, and I've got young kids, an 8-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old in the middle, a little boy in the middle of 2 girls. And I've tried to eliminate risk, and it's not specifically with regards to child sexual abuse, although definitely work to limit or reduce it there. But I've tried to limit it in other spots, and it's come back to bite me. So for a parent, what should we be looking for? Like who have you seen as the people who do it the most? Like the people who are actually doing the child sexual abuse, family, society, church leaders. I know that's become something, and I don't want to say that all church, but it, there have been violations. Friends, I know some girls that I went to school with, they would hang out with their friends, and then they would be abused by that person's either father or brother. So one, who's doing it that you've seen, and then one, as that protector that you alluded to, or not alluded to, but spoke about before, what should we be looking for in order to prevent it?
Yeah, I love your question because you served up a softball. We teach 5 principles to reduce risk, and you served up the softball for number 1, which is assess risky situations and practice navigating them. So understanding the risk is really, really important to risk reduction. So let me just share a few statistics that both answer your question and highlight how we assess risky situations. So the majority of child sexual abuse, meaning over 50%, is a minor on another minor. So that should immediately send messages to us as parents like, oh, it's not the creepy guy in the white van. Yes, that's still an issue, but that's not the primary risk. So it's like, okay, what situations am I putting my kids in where they're alone with other minors and could be at risk? Well, we dive a little bit further and we learn that the average age of a minor that sexually harms another minor is 14. So now I'm like, okay, 14-year-old potentially abusing a 7, 8, 9-year-old. That's a high-risk situation. So I start thinking about that in terms of babysitting, get together with cousins or friends older siblings, right? And then my attention to where the risk is starts to elevate. So that's the most common. The other most common is teen on teen sexual assault. So then my brain goes like, hey, first year of dating, have I prepped my kids to be a good date and to find good dates, and how they interact with those dates on one another in terms of setting, holding, and respecting boundaries is really important. Have I empowered them with that? So let me just give you one story. I'm going to give you my daughter. So let me start where the story ends. A couple of years ago, she's now 25. She was 22 at the time. She came to me and she was pretty somber, and she was really struggling with something. She said, Dad, I just found out that a friend in my friend group sexually assaulted several of my friends in high school. And she said, I'm feeling guilty because it didn't happen to me. And I feel like the reason it didn't happen to me is because you taught me about boundaries. So she's dealing with the survivor guilt, right? Of, hey, I wasn't impacted, but my friends were. And she went on to say, I remember this, in this case, it was a boy. I remember this boy pushing on my boundaries multiple times. And I knew how to hold my boundaries, so it never went anywhere. So now let's back up and say, how did we get there? Okay, how did we get there? Well, let's go back to when she was in 6th grade and she came home, or more correctly said, I came home from work, was putting some away in my closet, and she said, Dad, what does the word prostitute mean? I know it has something to do with sex, but I don't know what it means. So think about what's happening there. A 6th grade girl is asking her dad a question that has to do with sex. She knows it has to do with sex, but she feels comfortable doing it anyway. That's because there were lots of risk reduction conversations that led up to that. Fast forward to when she was a sophomore in high school, a boy kept hugging her. She didn't like it. He wouldn't stop. She came and talked to us. We said, well, we've been teaching you about boundaries. This is a good chance to practice. We can intervene if you don't want to practice right now. It's our job to protect you. What do you want to do? She came back about a week later. She said, let me try. And it was a couple weeks after that, she came back really excited. And she's like, Mom, Dad, he finally got the message. I had to get in his face a little, but he finally got the message. right? So she's learning how to set and hold boundaries. That's a hug, right? A hug generally isn't considered a sexual assault, right? But she was learning in that circumstance how to set and hold boundaries, to where later, and there were several other parts of her story I could share, but in the interest of time, until later when it did matter, when this boy that had assaulted some of her friends was pushing on her boundaries, she knew how to deal with that risk. So that's a real world example of how risk reduction happens. It's thousands of little talks, not one or two big talks. Don't get me wrong, we still need to do the big talks, but it's thousands of little talks, and I can share some more examples of that on how those reduce risk.
I definitely want to get into that, and I want to talk about, once somebody is sexually assaulted in one way or another, how they heal. But I want to actually kind of maybe ask you a question that maybe you've not been asked before. I don't know, maybe it's a little bit verboten, if you will. But why do people do this? I mean, sure, there's a sex drive, right? But why do people do it? And then those people that do it, how do they stop whatever it is driving them to do it? And then taking that one step further, if they do commit it, what should they do?
All right, let's start by just separating a little bit. The reason a minor does it to another minor is very different than the reason an adult does it to a minor. Okay, so let's deal with the adult side first. So when we're talking adult perpetration, pedophilia, all the ugly things that come with it, there's two major drivers for them. One is a compulsive, even might be described as an addictive need to control other human beings, is a major reason that it's done. The second is attraction to minors, and how they get there is a longer story. But those are the two reasons adults tend to perpetrate against minors. One of those two things, control or attraction, sexual attraction to minors, which is an unhealthy form of sexual attraction. The reason a minor does it can be very different. It can be repeating what they've experienced or seen done through, let's say they've been viewing violent porn and they see those acts being done as a 14-year-old, they may act out on that. Maybe they were abused themselves and are repeating that behavior. There can be some control elements with minors as well. But one of the major differences between minors and adults is minors have really low recidivism, especially if it gets addressed, which goes in a little bit to your other question of what do you do, right? And maybe more importantly, what do you do as a parent if your minor child harms another child sexually, right? Recidivism for adults is the exact opposite end of the spectrum. Interventions, though there continues to be promising and emerging interventions, there hasn't been major breakthroughs that says, here's how we solve this for adults. We haven't figured it out yet, which is discouraging, but we need to speak the reality. So if you're dealing with this as an adult or a minor, so as a minor, I'd really say, Mom, Dad, I know it's hard. I know you want to protect your family, but the sooner you get professionals involved, which is going to include some legal ramifications in most states, the more likely your child will not turn into an adult perpetrator.
Right.
And not only are you protecting your child that's harming, but you're also protecting other children from being harmed and other potential children in the future from being harmed. The greatest risk to your child, if they're sexually harming others, is for you to sweep it under the rug and bury it because it's hard for the family to deal with.
Of course.
And you're actually making it more likely that they're going to repeat the behavior and have that behavior continue into adulthood. So, Mom, Dad, you've got to just bite that and deal with it and deal with the repercussions of it. For adults, there are different interventions, but my number one thing I would say to an adult that's struggling with it is turn to professional therapy, and specifically in that professional therapy, work with someone that specializes in sexual harm. Don't go to a generic therapist. It won't work. They're not prepared to do what it takes to help you. So I'll just pause there to your question. We can dive deeper in any of that, but I'll just stop there.
The last piece, that was a lot, and forgive me, I asked a lot, so totally understand the response. So the last piece is for those who do commit it. What should they do? So, as an adult, let's say one of our adults listening has, I'm going to come to the percentage piece here in a little bit of people who have both committed it and who have had it. They've been on the victim side, but maybe one of our listeners has done it. What do they do in that point?
Engage with a therapist, and as horrific as it is, engage with law enforcement. You've got to be accountable if you're going to deal with this. If you don't deal with it, the likelihood is you're going to continue to harm. So if you're in a spot that you're like, I've done this, I don't want to continue to harm, you've got to engage with professional therapy, and you've got to engage with law enforcement. Those are your two channels.
I mentioned coming to the percentage piece. What percentage of the population has been exposed to childhood sexual abuse?
Stats are always tricky when it comes to incident rates. So I'm going to share a stat with a little caveat. Understand that caveat is depending on the study you look at, the stats will vary, because how researchers define abuse changes. But the stat we use at Saprea is...
There's also a piece that, who talks about it, right? Who's going to say that they were abused? I'm sure there's a large number of people who were abused that don't talk about it, that
especially men.
The stats.
The answer to the question is 1 in 8 children worldwide, and that actually carries to U.S. stats as well, are sexually abused by age 18. And that is 1 in 4 women, 1 in 10 boys. You'll see the stats vary more on the boys than the girls, because boys don't disclose as readily. So you'll see the stats for men anywhere between 1 in 6 and 1 in 20, but we land on the 1 in 10. For girls, you usually see somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 7, somewhere in there. It's a high percentage of our population. We have millions of survivors walking our streets. They're in our offices. They're in our families. They're in our communities. They're all around us. We may not realize it because most people don't talk about it, which is part of the problem we've got to solve. But the other stat I'll share with you that goes a little bit to one of your earlier questions is when it comes to where the risk is, survivors know their perpetrator 80% of the time. In other words, they're in their circle of trust, right? You brought up religious leaders, could be in that circle of trust, a coach, a teacher, a family member, right? A friend. That's 80% of the time. Again, depending on the research, between 10 and 20% is by a stranger. So stranger danger is still relevant, but it's not the dominant part of the issue.
Yeah, that makes it even more scary.
Yeah.
It's scary regardless, but it even makes it more. So we talked about, men not talking about it. So we talked about men not talking about it. What percentage of men, maybe not even, don't worry about the percentage, but let's talk about why men aren't speaking about it, and how do we heal? How do we speak about it? How do we make that more societally accepted to speak about it?
Yeah, so the first part, why men don't speak about it, let's start just with disclosure. 15 to 20 years on average is the time between when the abuse happened and first disclosure for men. So think about that, right? They're burying it after it happens. So most men aren't even disclosing till adulthood, if they disclose at all. The reasons men don't disclose, there's two primary ones. Shame is relevant to both men and women survivors of child sexual abuse, but men deal with shame differently. And there's a significant amount of shame due to the perception that sexual abuse violates masculinity norms of strength, of stoicism, that holding it together, of our agency, like we get to choose our destiny. Also challenges heterosexuality. So for heterosexual men, there's a real fear that people will perceive them as homosexual. The reality is child sexual abuse has nothing to do with whether you're hetero or homosexual. There's fears of being labeled weak or not a real man that men deal with, right? If I was a real man, this would have never happened to me. I would have stopped it. I would have controlled the situation, right? And so those elements of shame really, really weigh on men and drive them into secrecy. And that's the biggest reason why men don't disclose.
It just makes a lot of sense what you're saying. I could see how God, that hasn't been part of my past, luckily either. But I could see how men would sit very, very deeply in shame. And men sit in so much shame about so many other things, right? And that's like, that don't even come close to sexual abuse. So I could see then just burying that for, if it's, maybe 15, 20 years, but if not their lifetime. But that's.
Yeah, I was going to say, for the hetero homosexual piece, what for young men who are assaulted by women, there's probably a level of shame there, like, well, I was a man and I didn't stand up to that woman. Or the flip side is, oh, you're a stud, you got assaulted by a woman. That's like, yeah. Really, like, you see these teachers who are, mid 30s, early 40s, taking advantage of a 14-year-old. And if he were to say anything, then they're going to be like, oh, way to go, man, you got laid. And
Yep.
It's like, come on, really? Is that
I
where we're at?
got lucky.
Yeah.
A
Right.
woman 10 years older than me, doesn't matter if I'm 15 and she's 25, I got lucky.
Right.
That message is fed and reinforced to boys and men constantly. It's changing slowly, but growing up a kid of the 80s, I was fed it every day in media. It was reinforced in the locker room.
Yeah, same.
We didn't know different. This is what we were taught. Hopefully we're doing better with our rising generations on this, though I think we still got a lot of room to grow. But the message we've sent is boys and men of all ages should always welcome and be ready for sexual experiences. Always, right? It's what makes you a man. And it's just not true. Another thing that's really challenging for men with shame is almost in all cases, men have a sexual response when they're abused, right? And so, they have a genital response. So they're like, well, it felt good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I must not have been abused, right?
Mm.
Again, it doesn't matter that she was 10 years older and coerced me or,
Right.
manipulated me into it.
Sure.
It felt good. So, it must not be abused. So they often don't even perceive when they've been sexually abused until later in life. They look back and go, wow, that wasn't right.
Right. And if they did say it to some of their friends, because they're like, hey, I got abused, that people will be like, oh, you didn't get abused. That was awesome. That's awesome that happened to you, which is terrible. Right. Well, okay. So as a man or for anybody for that matter, how does a victim begin the journey of healing?
The first step is to develop emotional attunement. Think of attunement as tuning in or really becoming aware of your emotions. What happens so often, this is true of men and women, one of the most common ways they deal with the trauma is by numbing their emotions. If they don't feel, they don't have to deal with it. And they don't make a conscious decision to numb. It's a survival response that our bodies and brains, our nervous system specifically, do automatically without us thinking about it. But as those emotions are numbed, we have to reawaken awareness to those emotions, and emotional attunement is the way we do that. We develop a self-awareness around it. We can talk more about any of these principles if you want to dive deep. But once we're more aware of these emotions, we've learned to attune to them, then we have to start to learn to regulate those emotions, and then act with intentionality and develop new ways to manage or deal with the trauma we experienced. So those are really kind of the core pieces behind healing. Is we have to first become aware of it. We have to then learn to regulate. Then we have to learn to act with intention. Because what usually happens for most survivors is their nervous system drives certain behaviors as a way to respond or cope with the trauma, and those become automatic for them, and many of them become unhealthy. So it could be substance use, could be bad relationships, could be issues with sexuality in terms of their sexual experiences, could be shame that we talked about. So their brain's feeding them these messages. And so often they don't connect those messages that are unhealthy to their abuse. As they attune, start to regulate, and become intentional about how they respond to their emotions, they're able to start parsing that out and making sense of what happened to them and choose a different path.
For a man, let's say, because this show's typically for men, or majority of our listeners are men, what typically happens to a man who does decide to come forward with this past and present it, as far as emotionally what's happening to them, maybe what's happening with them, with their family, as far as accepting them for coming forward with this, what's happening after a man opens up?
One of the first things that they're likely to deal with is facing the fear of breaking or emotions overflowing. So especially if they've numbed their emotions and they're starting to awaken those, the reality is they haven't learned to regulate yet in most cases. So those emotions are likely to overflow, and it's going to be really tempting for them to put it back in the box and never talk about it again. And even though I wasn't a survivor myself of child sexual abuse, I did learn to numb as a kid for other reasons. And I've had to learn, my first 25 years of my life were about numbing. My last 25 years have been about learning to feel again. So I get this fear, and it's really intense. I remember when my daughter said, anger was the last emotion that I learned to reawaken. And I remember walking down the hall of my home and hearing my daughter say, "Why is my dad acting like an angsty teenager?" And in that moment, I just wanted to put it all back in the box. Like, I do not want my daughter to know me that way, right? But I was learning how to deal with anger for really the first time in my life. So for survivors, they're going to go through the same thing. They're going to have new experiences emerging, and it's almost as if they're having to relearn how to experience these emotions. And that is very, very scary. And it's very tempting to just shove it back in. And there were times in my own life where, I kind of had an awakening, shoved it back in, awakening, shoved it back in. And so just being willing to allow yourself time to suffer is a really, really, really important starting principle. As you deal with that fear, kind of suffering isn't the opposite of fear, but when it comes to emotions, in my mind, it is how we regulate fear, is we allow ourselves to just sit in it and suffer with the pain and experiences that come up with it, and give ourselves space to suffer. And many men fear that if I allow myself to suffer, I'm giving in to being a victim. It's actually the opposite. Your victimhood is wrapped up in your unhealthy coping behaviors, not in your suffering. Your suffering is what allows you to rewrite a new story and to overcome that victimhood. So really allowing yourself room to suffer is really, really important. We could go through a bunch more, but I'll just leave it at those two. acknowledging that fear, allowing yourself room to suffer, those are kind of those two early stage things that are really important when you start dealing with this.
Well, with that, allowing yourself space and time to suffer, what about allowing others who have experienced it time and space to suffer, and specifically those who may not have opened up about it? And what I mean by that is, one, like, what signs should we look for potentially to potentially identify someone who may have experienced sexual assault, sexual abuse? And like, what questions should we ask, of our family, our children, maybe of friends, right? As a group of men, and somehow you suspect that of another man, what should you look for? What should you ask?
Yeah, I would say you don't need to ask anything. You need to do something.
Okay. What is it that we should do?
Yeah, let me give you a real example. So, I shared a little brief version of my history with the issue, but it was, a little over 10 years ago now that I started working in it full time. And what I did is my behavior started changing. I started talking about the issue a lot more. I started advocating around the issue a lot more. And immediately that created a place of safety for survivors to talk to me. I wasn't planning on that happening, but it was crazy what happened. So I'm talking about people I've known all my life, or family members on my wife's side that I've known for 30 years, or friends that I've known for 20 years. Like, these are people I'm close to. I had no idea they were survivors until I started advocating and became a safe place for them to disclose. It's less about asking people anything and more about becoming an advocate. You're going to have, I'd be surprised if you don't have this experience coming out of this podcast. Someone that you love and know is going to listen to this podcast and say, thank you for talking about that. You know what? I've got my own story. I'm the 1 in 7. I would be floored if that didn't happen to you over the next few months. And so as you start talking about and you start advocating around the issue, whether that's on the prevention side or advocating for survivors to heal, that probably doesn't matter which side you're advocating around, or both. But as you start saying, hey, enough's enough, we're going to deal with this as a society, and I'm going to be part of that, and I'm going to talk about it, survivors will start opening up to you. Then you do have to be in a place to give them space, right? It's not about fixing right then, right? So in that case, what we ask, a little bit to your question, when people do disclose, is, it's always starts with a thank you for trusting me message, then follows like, I'm in your corner. How can I help? You get to control what I do with this. This is your story, but I want to help. How can I help? So that's the spirit of any questions that we ask once that disclosure's happened.
Yeah. I've some of the work that I do with men, it's amazing what happens when you do create that space for them to just non-judgmental, I'm here with another man holding space for them. And when you said that, and the big key of that is trust. And when you have that trust and you create that space, it's absolutely amazing how a man can quickly transform, or just feel that support. And they begin to release from all that like maybe that shame cycle that they keep living in, and that shame cycle is just probably exacerbating a hell of a lot of numbing, a hell of a lot of bad habits. But just having that opportunity and to have the willingness to do that is just huge. Just anyone out there listening, like, if that person's out there in your life that you can share something this deep with, like, it is just incredibly beneficial to do something like that. It's awesome. You
mentioned it there, Will. Some of the things that people do, and you've mentioned it too already, Chris, is, drinking or avoiding. There's different ways that this trauma shows up later in life. How specifically does it maybe show up in relationships, in work, in leadership, in health? And I'd imagine there's even places where people are trying to overcome their sexual abuse by overworking, excelling, trying to make up for their guilt? How does it show up?
Yeah, lots of different ways, but I'll hit on a few that you brought up. So the last one you brought up, hyperproductivity, very, very common for survivors. Survivors of child sexual abuse are some of our most accomplished people in all of society, because if they can stay focused on whatever they're being productive around, they don't have to deal with the emotions that come with sitting with their thoughts. And hyperproductivity is not only one of the signs, but it also is cyclical. And they'll often be so hyperproductive, they'll do it at an unsustainable rate. And so one of the signs is you'll see a highly productive individual that crashes at intervals. And meaning their hyperproductivity is beyond their actual capacity. They're using it to numb or avoid something. That's what drives them. But eventually their body crashes, and they go through that crash and then re-engage in a hyperproductivity cycle. So that's definitely one of the signs. You know, some people are just more productive than others, and if they're in a sustainable level of productivity, it's probably not unhealthy. They're probably not using it to numb or avoid. But if it's following that cyclical pattern, there's a good chance they're using it to numb or avoid something.
Well, it's also so dramatic how you speak of it. It's like, oh, hyper productive, getting stuff done. Like, you know, maybe they're probably even bragging about like 80-hour work weeks or something like that. You know, living in their work, putting all their full investment in their work, and then the crash comes. It's like, so it's just like a spike and a fall, a spike and a fall. Instead of like, you know, someone that's more healthy that has, I'd imagine, a more a healthier outlook, and they're not kind of running from the shame. Like there's a little more even keeled, or at least to have healthier ways to cope with like the hyperactivity in their work and stuff like that.
Definitely. You know, a few other signs that are really important. So, substance use is a major one. So substance use, what it does is it blunts the emotion. So it's a type of emotional numbing, but it's actually blunting or making the emotion less intense or less active. So it really impacts what's called emotional reactivity. And so use of substances, rarely does someone use substances as a primary issue. They're almost always dealing with something from their childhood. It could be something other than childhood, but most often from childhood, and not just sexual abuse. It can be many other childhood traumas. But most individuals that work through substance use are numbing something from childhood. Another key sign, at least in relationships, is inability to. This is back to that term attunement. So attunement has two sides. It's that self-awareness and tuning into our own emotions, but the other side of attunement is the ability to tune into others' emotions, which has a lot of the empathy piece to it and the ability to let others' emotions flow through you and allow you to experience them in a healthy way and tune into emotions. The way I often like to describe attunement is an analogy. So think of attuning to ourselves as a violinist in an orchestra tuning her own instrument, right? She gets it just right. But she also has to tune in to the other violinists and the entire orchestra. That's that outward or external attunement. So people that struggle with trauma often have a really hard time attuning with others. And so they can't give and receive in relationships in healthy ways. So a lot of them deal with dysfunctional relationships as a result. You know, and they may just say, my marriage is just on the rocks, and that's where they leave it. They're not even connecting the dots back to, well, I have some unresolved trauma, and until that gets resolved, I don't really have the ability to give or receive in a relationship. There's many others, but those are a few of those signs.
And I imagine, in the sexual side of a relationship, it shows up in a big way as well. Not just the attunement, but I mean, I'm sure that awakens all sorts of memories in the bedroom. So, all right. Well, in the interest of time, I'll continue here. But we talked about the different perpetrators and where they might come from. They might come from coaching. It's within that trusted circle, right? Coaching, church, teachers. Where are these various institutions falling short? So churches, schools, families, where are we falling short?
There's actually a lot of good news on that front. We've still got a lot of work to do, but there's a lot of good news, right? So a lot of the media that talks about maybe a church or school system, rightly so, is based on survivors later on in life seeking justice. So if we're talking about someone that was abused 40 years ago compared to, and how these organizations operated compared to today, they've made major changes. And there's actually some good research on this. They did some comparison groups of age cohorts of youth's experiences with what are called youth serving organizations. So youth serving organizations are groups like scouting, boys and girls clubs, right? They also looked at faith communities. They also looked at schools. And every single one except for schools, and we can talk about why, has made significant progress according to this research over the past 20 years, because almost all of them have implemented risk reduction methods. Like scouting got really, really big on 2 deep leadership. It's a major risk reducer, right? They started implementing trainings for all leaders, doing background checks. So each of these risk reducers didn't eliminate sexual abuse in scouting, but we're seeing actual statistically significant reduction in its impact. So I applaud those organizations, and also at the same time am clapping for them to encourage them to keep going. They're not done. Schools are the ones that actually have not made any progress and may even have taken a step backwards.
And you had mentioned why that was. What is that?
Yeah, they haven't done a good job implementing protocols like these other groups, like churches have done, or youth serving organizations. Number one, that's the big one. Also, there's a high level of loyalty in the education profession to one another. So there's some really interesting research that looks at why teachers don't disclose when they see unhealthy behaviors of other teachers. And it's largely driven by their desire to not have a negative impact on their system where they work, right? Whether that's that school or that school district. And the absence, the controls put in by those organizations and the protections to reward teachers for protecting rather than reprimand or punish teachers for reporting, the incentives aren't there for them to change their behaviors, and they're not changing their behaviors.
Sure. Well, that's hard to hear.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked earlier about the young men who may be abused by a woman who's 10 years older, and they're also going to have a sexual response that, and it may feel good. So in their mind, they may question, was that abuse?
Yeah.
How does a young person identify that as abuse?
100% of the time, with very few exceptions, if it's an adult on one side and a minor on the other, it doesn't matter how consensual it felt to that minor, it was abuse. Our laws are clear on it, and the laws are driven by how the brain develops. And the law has determined, and I agree with it from a clinical standpoint, a teenage brain is not developed enough to consent to sexual activity with an adult. There are a few exceptions to that. They're called Romeo and Juliet laws, where if the adult is close in age, so think like an 18 and a 17-year-old, then it is considered consensual and not considered abusive. But when we're talking a 10-year difference and you've got a minor and an adult, it's 100% of the time non-consensual and abuse. No matter how that 15-year-old boy responded, reacted, wanted, engaged, didn't engage, doesn't matter what their behaviors were or are, that was abuse 100% of the time.
Got it. Well, thanks for drawing that line. It's pretty clear. So, all right, Will, I want to turn it over to you, my friend.
Well, so you mentioned earlier about, some of I actually watched a video on you as well about ways that you can teach your children prevention. You talk about eliminating risk, but there's a few others in this video I saw that I thought would be very good for our audience to hear, because this is something that's real. And, let's actually create a society where maybe we shift the numbers from 1 in 4 to, 1 to 1,000 eventually. So what are some of those other risks or the prevention things that we can teach our kids?
Just drawing back on my story with my daughter, I brought up one, but I want to reinforce it. And that is setting, holding, and respecting boundaries. So that first principle was assess risky situations and practice navigating them. Second one is set, hold, and respect boundaries. So that came out in her story. And teaching our kids how to set boundaries, how to hold boundaries, and how to respect boundaries addresses both sides of this, right? Respecting boundaries is about honoring what the other person wants. So let me kind of bring that down to real world. Probably if you were to ask my kids, what is the most common thing mom and dad say in our house? It's listen to her voice or listen to his voice, right? That is 100% us teaching to respect a boundary, right? So maybe I've got an 18-year-old right now and a 10-year-old in my home, and the 18-year-old loves to tease the 10-year-old. He's had 18 years worth of, hey, do you hear what she's saying? She's asking you to stop. You need to stop, right? So that is how you teach both sides of boundaries. In terms of setting boundaries, very similar. When my daughter that daughter I told the story about went to prom, there was a boy and she wasn't sure about him. She didn't know well, so she wanted to set boundaries. So we practiced with her. This is the conversation you have with him. The boundaries she wanted set were she wanted to stay in the group the whole time and she wanted to be home at a certain time. Right? So we worked with her to say, okay, this is how you have that conversation, which, by the way, kind of a funny story. She said, Dad, I want you to also talk to him when he comes. So I did. So I invite him into the room, right? And I asked him one question.
Cleaning your gun.
Yeah, right. Typical.
So he's sitting down and I'm like, hey, Christy's my wife. Christy and I work really hard to keep Sophia, our daughter, safe. What are you going to do to keep her safe tonight? And his foot started patting on the floor. It was like when you scratch a dog right in that right spot. It was going, he was nervous. But then he gave an amazing answer, after thinking about it. He said, and I won't get it exactly right, but he said something to this effect. He said, no alcohol, no drugs. We'll stay in our group. We'll keep our clothes on. I said, great. Go have a great time.
Nice.
Right? So modeling that behavior of setting, holding, and respecting boundaries is important as well. So teaching them to do it, but also modeling it. And when you see your children's boundaries being violated, being able to determine, are they equipped to deal with that? Like if I have a 15-year-old daughter and she has a 40-year-old man pushing on her boundaries, that's not the time to teach her to set her boundaries. Right? There's a power difference there. That's the time for me to intervene and step in. Right? And maybe I can use it as a use case after the fact to teach her and say, hey, this is how you might handle a situation like that as you continue to grow up. But we need to have realistic expectations. One of the hardest things around teaching, setting, holding, and respecting boundaries is around body language. In teaching our kids to read body language. The reason why, particularly with sexual violence, the most common response to sexual violence, the nervous system response is to freeze, which means they're not going to fight, they're not going to flight. and they're going to freeze. And some, especially teenagers, construe that as consent when it's not, right? They're freezing. And so you got to teach, hey, if they're not into this, like if you're trying to kiss her and she's not into it, you need to stop, whether she says stop or not, right? So learning how to teach them around boundaries with body language. So it's hearing the verbal cues, but also reading the body language. So that's really, really critical to setting boundaries. Another thing we do, another one of those principles is teaching sexual health to our kids. One of the biggest challenges of kids being abused is they don't have words to describe what's happening, so they don't talk about it, giving the parent a chance to intervene. So remember my daughter's story about saying the word prostitute? The reason she was able to say, and I know this has something to do with sex, is because we had talked to her about sex at an age-appropriate level, right? And so we've got to have that dialogue. That's another big risk reducer. There's others, but those are a few more.
Well, no, I think it's also kind of part of the subtext. What you're saying is having a strong relationship with your child, having having space for them, continually working on that bond, so you can actually have those conversations with them. So. And having them be comfortable, and you making the comfort in those conversations as well, instead of like, 'cause there's a lot of, in my family, I grew up kind of Catholic, and there's a lot of shame around sex. Like there's never there's never a conversation really about sex. I remember I mentioned in the show before, like I had this girl come over. My parents left the house. I asked them like 9 times, like, when they're going to come home. I had this girl come over, I tried to play around a little bit. I was really nervous, really shy. And sure enough, like parents got the message that I was having someone over because I asked them when they're coming home 9 times. So, I threw out the back door, as my parents came in the house, right? They came in and and I thought like there was this moment, I think I was like 15 or something like that, 14. I'm like, all right, I'm really going to have the birds and the bees conversation. And, my father looks at me and he's like, instead of like, I was really wanted to have this conversation with him, or be brought into my manhood a little bit, if you will. And he just looks at me, he's like, oh, it's a sin to spread your seed. And I was like, there's distortion in reality in some way. I know. I was like, what? Like, this is it, so anyway, I'm glad you have a healthy relationship with your kids, and obviously it's proven very valuable in order to have that relationship with them. But if a man's listening or even a woman's that's listening and they're kind of waking up to the fact like, oh, I might have been abused, or they've been kind of bearing it for quite a while. What would like the healing process look like for them? Like it maybe like the first couple steps and maybe what they can expect, down the road a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm going to answer that question, but I want to point out something you said in your story that I think is really important for the listeners.
Great.
You talked about being safe for our kids. Mm-hmm. I can't emphasize enough to our listeners that as men, our emotional health directly equates to safety with our kids. We've got to get ourselves emotionally healthy if we want to be safe places for our kids. And I've lived that journey. I've been unhealthy. I know it. I know it's hard for us as men to go on that journey or even admit that we need to go on that journey, but it's worth it. I promise it's worth it. And if you need your love of your kids to be your motivator, I don't care what it is that motivates you. Let it be your motivator. Get emotional healthy. It's the most important thing you can do to create safety for your kids.
Thanks for saying that.
Yeah. So to your question of, what do people expect? It really depends where they're at in their journey. And a big part of what we do at Saprea is try really hard to meet people where they're at. So for some people, what that looks like is doing some resources or some work at home. We're really, really big advocates of what's referred to as psychoeducation, which is helping individuals through educational modules connect dots between what they are experiencing every day and their trauma. So they may know like their sexual abuse is nagging at them because it keeps surfacing, but they don't really understand what impacts it's had on them. That psychoeducation is really important. So, for example, on our website, we have 17 symptom-based modules where they can go and say, oh, I'm experiencing, John, you brought this one up, issues with my sexual health. I'm going to drill down into that module. For another one, there's a module on shame. There's another module on emotional dysregulation. So my emotions are all over the place and I can't seem to grapple it, right? So those modules are designed to say, okay, this is what you're experiencing, symptom. Here's what it has to do with your trauma. Because people aren't ready to heal until they can make sense of what they're experiencing, especially when it comes to trauma. So that's usually a starting point, is connecting the dots. So whether it's through self-service on our website or they come through one of our programs, that's always where we start. We start with that psychoeducation and say, this is how trauma impacts your brain. This is how trauma impacts your body. And immediately they start having aha moments. One of the most common phrases survivors say when they come through our program is, I've been in therapy for, and then fill in the blank, 17 years, 20 years, 10 years. Why hasn't someone taught me this? And it's because our therapeutic community, especially the way the pay models are with insurance, they reward diagnose and treat. They don't reward psychoeducation. And so most therapists diagnose and treat, much like physical health care. And it's really not the best model for mental health. Yes, we need diagnose. Yes, we need treat, but we also need a really healthy dose of psychoeducation. Once we have that psychoeducation, then we can start to make sense, okay, which of my symptoms I'm experiencing that are connected to my trauma are most acute? And that's when they can start saying, okay, that's where I need to go unpack with a professional or through a program of some sort or a support group. That's when I need to go unpack and start seeing what's in that box. And where possible, we're strong advocates of individual therapy, even though our organization doesn't provide it. We provide all the wraparound services that augment that therapeutic experience, that make that therapeutic experience work better or more, including something that will be relevant to you all, and that's a lot of mindfulness work. And we teach a lot of mindfulness work in our programming.
What does that look like, if you can? What does some of that mindfulness work look like? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So like in our 4-day retreat, as an example, there are several things that we have them do to engage or start to awaken their attention to mindfulness. The very first night we do a drumming circle. And,
I love it.
Yeah. That drumming circle, right, starts regulating the nervous system. Hearts start beating in unison with one another, right? Starts calming. So, that gives them a little exposure to the power of music as a mindfulness activity. Later in that retreat, we're doing trauma-sensitive yoga, so some body work, right? We do an introduction to Muay Thai, which is a martial art, a mindful approach to martial arts. Muay Thai is a very mindful approach to martial arts. We do an outdoor, so our retreats are in a canyon, so beautiful setting. Do a nature an experience that connects them through mindfulness. We do some really, really solid grounding work, much like you did at the beginning of this podcast, breath work, taste, smell. So we're just giving them exposure to all these different methods that they can engage in healing, and mindfulness is a big part of it.
I'm glad you're bringing those. Well, and we need to get back in touch with the moment. We need to get back in touch with our emotions. We need to get to our body. We need to get in touch with other people. We need to get in touch with the environment. I mean, that's like, and then we're here. We're present. We're now. Instead of being lost in our thoughts or isolating ourselves even further. So I'm so glad you're doing that. I mean, and it sounds very therapeutic for the men that go through the program, or just anybody that's going through it. What does it look like? Somebody that's gone through your program, or maybe another program, has kind of woke up, dealt with this trauma. What are some of the the outcomes you see that for people that have gotten the other side of this trauma that's been damaging them for years?
Yeah, so we have some great news there. We measure three things. And we've been working with women in our programming a lot longer than men. So the ones I'm going to share with you are specific to women. We still need more time to see if they carry for men as well. But here's what we see. So going back to that retreat program that I shared with you, we measure post-traumatic stress symptom reduction, coping efficacy increase, and I'll explain these for your listeners, and then overall well-being or life satisfaction indicators. So on average, a woman that comes through the retreat, we track them over a 12-month period, experiences on average a 37% reduction in post-traumatic stress symptoms. So that, what does that look like in their everyday life? So as they're stop by the store on the way home from work and are going, pushing their cart down the aisle, a person walks by them and smells like their perpetrator in the past that would have triggered them, may have gone into a panic attack, had to leave the store feeling really discouraged. When you have a 37% reduction in symptoms, it just basically means you're being triggered less by those types of day-to-day experiences. So the coping efficacy, 19% increase in coping efficacy, which says when I do get triggered, what is my ability to cope with that trigger? So it increases by 19%. So when you have a 37% reduction in post-traumatic stress and a 19% increase in coping efficacy, then you have what we call our life satisfaction or well-being indicators, which is basically a measurement tool that measures how they perceive their life as a whole and how their well-being is as a whole. We see a 45% increase in well-being indicators or positive well-being indicators. So for those that come through our program, if you read some of their stories, they're going to say it was life-changing. That's the data that explains what they mean when they say it's life-changing. If any of us could walk out of here and say 12 months from now, my life is 45% better, we'd be like, sign me up.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It fundamentally changes their day-to-day experience. Healing is a process. You don't heal in 4 days. You don't heal in 12 months. It's a process. But they are that much better equipped to manage their day-to-day experiences, and it changes their lives. It changes their relationships. We refer to it as, and the industry often refers to it as post-traumatic growth, meaning they go through major growth cycles as they kind of unload this trauma.
Yeah.
They are like poised for major growth in their life, and that's called post-traumatic growth. So they're usually going through major positive growth cycles in their life. There's just so much good that happens.
Yeah. I love that you're doing this work. It's really needed out there.
Thank you.
Just a couple more things before we close. It's like, this is a very heavy topic. And you do this work all the time. Where do you see, you mentioned some of it already, like the community is the way that they're kind of vetting their people, but where do you see more of the light kind of breaking through, this such a deep and heavy load that people carry?
I have hopefully not an overly optimistic, but a very optimistic view of humanity, and particularly those in our country. I know there are a lot of people wringing their hands about our country and what is or isn't happening. I have a very different view. I see, if we take the United States, anytime we finally are willing to face a major issue, we figure it out, and we change, and we make progress. Whether that's smoking cessation, civil rights, whether it's what's that?
Seatbelts.
Seatbelts.
I know it's for real. I mean, that was real.
Seriously,
it's a big deal.
Right?
Yep.
It's when we acknowledge an issue, we deal with it. And we are seeing, particularly over the last 5-7 years, Americans are finally waking up to the issue of child sexual abuse. They're finally talking about it. It's still not comfortable for people to talk about it, but they're talking about it anyway. We're on a podcast right now talking about it. this is societal change.
Right.
And when Americans are willing to talk about an issue, we have a track record of finding solutions to that issue. So for me, that's the bright light that I am not moseying to, not walking to, I'm running to.
Yeah.
And I believe we will solve this issue. I don't know how many generations it's going to take, but I believe we can solve it and we will solve it.
There's also like a natural galvanizing force when we're like, this is about the kids. You know, and we're able to put aside our differences politically or whatever, or religiously, whatever it is. But when you talk about the kids, it's like, you know, people really begin to stand up, you know, and because I'm so glad we have that. I mean, that's so much of a lot of decisions we make in society is like for our kids, and I love the fact that you're protecting them. And last thing, yeah, John, anything?
No, I was just saying, heck yeah. I mean, I love having anybody protect kids. You know, they're so vulnerable, they're so innocent, and just kind of assume the best of everybody. And the predators are out there. So, you know, again, as I said before we hit record, as I said, since we've hit record, I appreciate what you're doing as a father.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up. Well,
yeah, no, anything, Chris, we've covered a lot of ground here. Anything, parting words or something you feel we need to mention before we close?
I think I'll just kind of end where we started, where you shared or asked me what are some things that I hope for. I hope for the survivors listening to this, that you walk away feeling that hope and healing is possible. We've got your back at Saprea. Come to saprea.org. All our resources are free. We're a nonprofit with generous funding from kind people. For those that want to fight the issue, protection is possible. There are resources that you can use to help protect your kids. You can also, you know, get into the fight with us if you want to support us financially or spreading the word or whatever it is as a nonprofit. We welcome that. We need your help to get this spread far and wide. And then to that last topic, just around emotional health as men, let's stop numbing our emotions as men. That takes work, but it's worth it. It provides health for us and safety for those we love. And so those are my parting words.
That's and you plugged yourself in those parting words as well. So that was another kind of question I had.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know you're active on LinkedIn, you know, so you guys can hit up Chris Yadon on LinkedIn for sure. And John, anything before we wrap this up?
We'll just we'll wrap it up with a closing breath. So Chris, we opened it up with a grounding practice. We close it up with a grounding practice.
Awesome.
And, you know, some of our listeners may very well need this after this discussion.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, I agree. I have a feeling some people are going to be reaching out to us, letting us know, maybe opening up to us the first time ever, because the space has been opened up. So I'll throw that out there too.
Yeah.
You know, Will and I, we're here for you all
100%.
as listeners, as viewers. You know, we're doing this work for you all, for ourselves as well. But if you do watch this and you get a sense that you need to open up and share what it is you've experienced, or if you just want somebody to listen, we're here for you. So please reach out. And then I know Chris is there too. I mean, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that's literally what he does for a living.
It is.
To me.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, let's wrap it up with this grounding practice. You know, just bring your attention to your breath, put your feet on the ground. And if closing your eyes is available and safe to you, then I invite you to do so. Otherwise, just keep doing what you're doing with your eyes. And let's begin with one exhale. Nice exhale, bringing your belly to your spine, holding empty at the bottom. And then a nice, long, slow, deep, intentional breath in, holding full at the top, and releasing. And that is a wrap. Chris, thank you so much, my friend. Really appreciate your being here with us today, but even more so, really appreciate the work that you're doing. I hope that you continue to do this work, and I hope that people reach out to you And I hope that others listening both open up and maybe reach out to you, Chris, to assist in your mission. Really believe in it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Will?
No, that's it. Just a big thanks to you. Backing up what John said about reaching out. This is how things really begin to change. So,
Right.
find that courage and make the call.
Well, thanks for the mic, guys. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks,
Be well.
listeners. Appreciate you all. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out mentalkingmindfulness.com.